What you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. Even for hardened detectives, professionals who had stared death in the face countless times, this case left them horrified. One officer would later admit it was unlike anything he'd ever seen in his career. But the horror here didn't come from some faceless predator in the night. It didn't come from a serial killer stalking strangers. The truth was much darker, because the killer was someone who lived inside her home. The victim, Kelly, a devoted mother and grandmother, had spent her life forgiving, hoping for change, and holding her family together despite years of hardship. But her endless love became her greatest weakness, and in the end, the very person she protected the most became her executioner. Detectives would walk into a scene so disturbing that even they struggled to process it. And what makes this story even harder to believe? The trigger for this explosion of violence wasn't money or revenge or jealousy. It was something so petty, so trivial, it almost defies reason. Before the nightmare, there was Kelly. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't famous. She was something more important. A mother and grandmother remembered for her laughter, warmth, and unshakable kindness. Friends described her as the kind of woman who would show up at your door with a smile when you needed it most. Neighbors remembered that no matter how little she had, she always found a way to give. To her children, she was a constant presence, a rock in good times and bad. Her home was simple, but it was filled with photographs of her kids, her granddaughter's toys scattered across the living room, and the scent of meals cooked with care. These were the small things that made her world feel safe. But Kelly's life was not free of grief. The sudden death of her eldest daughter in 2021 left a wound in her heart that never fully healed. Even through tears, she pressed forward, fragile on the inside, but smiling for the ones who needed her. Yet the love and forgiveness she gave so freely would become her greatest weakness, because the true danger she faced wasn't outside her front door, it was already living inside her home. But while Kelly was building her life around love and forgiveness, her only son Lewis was sinking deeper into a life defined by violence. In his early years, neighbors recalled him as a boy who could sometimes be polite, even protective of his sisters, but beneath those moments lay something darker. His temper was explosive. By his teenage years, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. At just 16, Lewis lashed out at his own mother, beating her in a fit of rage. The family was stunned. How could a son attack the very woman who raised him? Kelly, ever the optimist, forgave him, convinced it was an isolated outburst, but it wasn't. Again and again, Lewis's anger turned into aggression. Police were called to the home multiple times, logging reports of assaults not only toward Kelly, but toward siblings, girlfriends, anyone who challenged him. He drifted through life without work, without direction, yet always demanding money, food, or shelter from the mother he mistreated. And when the courts finally intervened, justice seemed soft. Short stints in custody, weak restrictions, leniency that did nothing to stop the violence. Each red flag was ignored or forgiven. Each chance to change wasted. And by 2023, the family no longer wondered if he would hurt Kelly again. They wondered when. That answer came on a night triggered by something so trivial, it almost defies belief. It was May 10th, 2023. What began as a quiet evening inside Kelly's flat would soon end in horror. Lewis showed up, agitated and restless. He wanted money. He wanted food. When Kelly refused, his fury rose over something so small it barely made sense. He demanded a bacon sandwich. When she told him no, That tiny spark tipped years of violence into a storm. Kelly was tired, sick, and for once, she refused to give in. That refusal would be the final act of defiance her son could not tolerate. As Lewis grew louder, Kelly reached for her phone. She dialed her daughter, Jordan, hoping someone might help calm her raging son. The sound of shouting and screams filled the line. Jordan begged her mother to get to safety, but she froze in fear. Kelly's voice cracked as she cried out through the phone, "Jord, ring the police," but Jordan didn't. She hesitated, convinced, perhaps hoping, that this was just another of many fights that would settle down in the morning. It never did. Moments later, the line went silent. Throughout the night, neighbors heard noises, a scream, thuds, the sounds of chaos. None called the police. By the next morning, Kelly's phone was eerily quiet, and then a chilling twist. When Jordan finally managed to reach the number again, it wasn't Kelly who answered, it was Lewis. Speaking calmly, almost casually, he told his sister that their mother was ill, that she was lying in bed, too sick to come to the phone. He implied she was simply resting, but Jordan could tell something was off. His words felt rehearsed, hollow, forced. What Jordan didn't know in that moment, what no one knew, was that by then, Kelly was already gone. And when detectives finally entered her home, what they found left even the most seasoned officers horrified. When officers finally arrived at Kelly's flat, they knew the situation was grim, but nothing prepared them for what they were about to see. The door was unlocked. Inside, silence hung heavy in every room. A neighbor had already noticed broken glass and traces of blood. But what the detectives found as they reached the bedroom is something they would never forget. Kelly lay motionless, hidden beneath a blanket soaked through. At first glance, it was clear this had been no accident, no sudden illness, as Lewis had tried to claim. The room told the story. Shattered glass across the floor, walls marked with signs of violence, and the quiet weight of a struggle that had raged far too long. Seasoned officers, men and women who had seen the worst, later admitted they were shaken. One described the atmosphere as pure devastation. Investigators worked quickly, gathering evidence. Footprints smeared in blood matched the shoes Lewis wore. His fingerprints covered surfaces across the home. And even as forensics pulled together the proof, Lewis himself was spotted casually walking around town, buying a drink, as if nothing had happened. When he was finally arrested, his response left officers chilled. Instead of sorrow or shock, Lewis smirked. He even laughed when told he was being charged with murder. One officer said it was like he was mocking the very idea of responsibility. For the detectives, the horror was no longer just the crime scene, but the realization they were staring at a man utterly without remorse. In the weeks that followed, the case moved swiftly through the justice system. But even in the courtroom, Lewis showed no remorse. During his hearings, he sat slouched, head bowed, refusing eye contact with the very family he had shattered. When the charges were read, he simply smirked. No apology, no words of regret, nothing. But his family found their voices. In an emotional victim impact statement, Kelly's surviving daughter addressed him directly. Her words cracked with anger and grief. "You've taken the most special person in my life, my mum. You bullied her, you bullied all of us. And now we have no mum, no sister, and you are no brother of mine." The courtroom fell silent. Even hardened prosecutors admitted the pain in her words cut deeper than any legal argument. Finally, the judge delivered the sentence: life imprisonment, with a minimum of just 16 years. For Kelly's family, it was barely justice at all. They couldn't understand how such brutality could be met with such leniency, and sitting just feet away, Lewis gave no reaction. Not anger, not sorrow, simply nothing. A hollow man, unmoved by the devastation he had caused. For many, the real horror wasn't just what he had done. It was knowing he may one day walk free again. Kelly's case is one that still lingers in the minds of those who worked it. Detectives described the scene as one of the darkest they had ever encountered, not because of how it looked, but because of what it represented. This wasn't random violence. It wasn't a stranger in the night. It was betrayal born inside the walls of a family home. A mother, remembered for her kindness and forgiveness, destroyed by the very son she had tried to protect, guide, and redeem. It's a reminder of a painful truth. Unconditional love does not always save. Sometimes it enables the very danger it's trying to heal. And while the court handed down a life sentence, many believe justice was never truly served. The thought that Lewis may one day walk free remains a haunting reality for his surviving family. For the detectives, and for anyone who comes across this story, the horror is not just in the brutality of the crime, but in how fragile safety within one's own home can be. This was one of the darkest crime files, but there are others still waiting to be opened.